significant rupture between the people of Pakistan and its omnipotent armed forces is now at hand in the violent aftermath of the arrest of former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Khan's rough arrest by the Punjab Rangers rather than the Islamabad police from the premises of the High Court is being viewed as a payback for his relentless attacks against the country's military establishment. It is ironic because not too long ago, Khan, early on as Prime Minister, was viewed as the military's poster boy or protégé. His transformation into the army's most acerbic bête noire now is quite extraordinary. As an institution with untrammeled sway over life in Pakistan, the army has been delivered a chastening blow by the supporters of Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf or the PTI party. Khan, of course, is now out on bail in all of the pending cases and charges. To understand the sordid goings on in Pakistan in the midst of a ruinous economy and its currency rupee dropping to an astonishing 300 plus against the US dollar, Mayank Chai report spoke to C. Uday Bhaskar, one of India's most respected strategic and global security affairs analysts and a former naval commodore. Uday Bhaskar.
What a turn of events, Uday. From being the poster boy of the army military intelligence establishment to its most acerbic bête noire. It's quite a transformation for Imran Khan.
Absolutely, Mayank. I think if we review the events of the last few days, beginning Tuesday, and we are on a Saturday today, the last few days have been truly tumultuous in terms of the internal developments in Pakistan. And I'm afraid what lies ahead, because of the manner in which, as you rightly described, Imran Khan, who was a protege of the Pakistani army, has now become its most acerbic critic. And he has left no stone unturned in targeting the current army chief, General Asim Munir. And this is unprecedented because if you look at the last 70 odd years of the history of Pakistan, from the time General Ayub Khan took over power in 1958 to where we are now, there's been a lot of, I would say, discomfort, murmurings about the excesses of the Pakistani army. But rarely has a chief been attacked by a politician, particularly a former prime minister, by name in this manner. So I think you're right about this observation that Mr. Imran Khan, the former prime minister, former test cricketer, at one time a well-known playboy in England, particularly because of his cricket, has now turned out to be, I think, literally a case of, as the Pakistani army and some of their supporters are saying, he is biting the hand very viciously, which fed him rather. At one time, if you remember, in his own,
Right.
when he climbed the ladder to become the prime minister, it was enabled in no small measure in 2018 by the Pakistani army and General Bajwa at that time. So I think you're absolutely right about this observation that this is unprecedented, the way in which the Pakistani army has been placed on the defensive.
It's extraordinary that there are comments which say that Imran Khan has done what our enemies, obviously India, couldn't do in 75 years. Now, that's perhaps the most damning denunciation that I've come across of any Pakistani leader to be described as someone who has done more damage than your absolute arch nemesis.
No, I think it's a reflection again of the dizzying pace with which developments have hurtled in Pakistan in terms of the blame game. Because if you look at the sequence of events, Mr. Imran Khan, as a former prime minister, was accused by the current government of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who incidentally is the younger brother of former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, of corruption, and they used the legislation under the NAB, the National Accountability Bureau. So this is the first of the blame game that we are talking about, that the government of the day has charged Mr. Imran Khan, a former prime minister, with corruption. And by the way, this is not unprecedented. When Mr. Imran Khan was the leader of the opposition, he moved every possible leverage that he had to accuse Mr. Nawaz Sharif, then prime minister, of corruption, and insisted that the establishment and the government and the judiciary should step in. And he hounded him till such time as Mr. Nawaz Sharif had to leave the country. So there is what I would call as a precedent in Pakistan where former prime ministers, going back to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, have been hounded sometimes to death by the leaders who have followed, particularly the men in khaki. So to that extent, I think the way in which Imran Khan has positioned himself in terms of the blame game is the moment the NAB was invoked and he was arrested, he sought relief, as it happens, from the higher court, which in a very rapid sequence of events not only gave him relief but chastised the government for the manner in which they had acted, which means another level of blame from one institution to the other. And the interesting part is that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, the Chief Justice, had also, I think, sent a very subtle signal to the High Court, which had upheld the NAB, the National Accountability Bureau, the manner in which the Rangers, the paramilitary force, had arrested him. So we are seeing, I think, multi-layered kind of blame game. One, institutionally, it's the binary is between the army and the political establishment, represented by General Munir and Mr. Imran Khan. But it's interesting that within the judiciary, the Supreme Court and the High Court are obviously on different pages. And of course, the political parties, the PPP, the Pakistan People's Party, and the PMLN are on one side, and the PTI is on the other. And I think in all of this, the average Pakistani citizen is reeling because of the way in which this blame game is playing. And by the way, let me add, it appears that there is also a dissent within the army, where one faction is blaming the other for either having supported or let down Imran Khan. These are the latest reports. Many of them are unconfirmed, but I think there has been some kind of, I would say, trend about dissent within the army. Various indicators are given. And the last, again, people are blaming Imran Khan for his Islamist leanings, because the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which has been a threat to the integrity of Pakistan, some of its affiliates are in a way conveying messages of solidarity with Imran Khan for what he's being subjected to. So you see, this is what I mean by multi-layered and operating at many levels. And all of this doesn't augur well, I think, for what I would call as the next few steps in terms of Pakistan's ability to deal with what has been unleashed.
The view ahead, Uday, do you think Imran Khan has effectively, almost permanently burnt his bridges with the army, or you think there is a reconciliation possible under a different leadership?
I am tentatively of the view that I think Imran Khan has burnt his bridges. Because institutionally, while General Munir, the current army chief, Asim Munir, appears to have been weakened and on the defensive in terms of dealing with what is happening, the thumb rule in Pakistan is that when the institution is under attack or threat, they close ranks. And they find a way of ensuring that the institution remains relatively unharmed, and they ensure their own internal transitions. For instance, I'll give you an example. When General Musharraf, after a very long innings, when he had unseated Mr. Nawaz Sharif in that bloodless coup in 1999, till 2007, when he had to deal with the Lal Masjid, and there were rumblings within the army, because he was an army chief who gave himself his own extensions, that the transition to General Kayani was, in a way, I would say, enabled by the closing of ranks at the highest levels within the Pakistani army, and General Kayani was identified. And he ensured that when he took over, that General Musharraf remained relatively unharmed. It's much later that you see the problems of General Musharraf, in a way, getting compounded when Mr. Nawaz Sharif is in the saddle. But I think my tentative sort of assessment at this point is that General Munir would not be abandoned by the army, and they would not throw him under the bus. They will find some way, I think, of arriving at a rapprochement whereby the institution of the Pakistani military, because it has such deep interests within the Pakistani ecosystem, that it must maintain its primacy within the power loop, so that whatever advantages and benefits that now accrue to it will not in any way be adversely impacted. That's my tentative reading, but then I'm the first to admit that as a student of Pakistan, there is no dearth of surprises as events unfold in that country.
My sense broadly sitting here is that there seems to be sort of an informal project underway with the sort of an odd coming together of the PMLN and the army establishment to completely decimate Imran Khan as a political force. And if they don't succeed, they'll perhaps end up making him even stronger than he might have been. What's your sense? Do you think there is a sort of a gang up between the two? Because the same PMLN, sorry to complete the point, the same PMLN guys were complaining about being victimized by the same army establishment. And now they are doing the same with Imran Khan.
Again, I think that's a fair observation that today there is a consensus between the PMLN, the Nawaz Sharif faction of the Pakistani Muslim League, and the PPP, where we have Mr. Zardari, the former president, still as a very potent kind of leader there. His son, Bilawal, is of course now the foreign minister of Pakistan and the face of the PPP. And the army, led by General Munir, are on the same page in trying to prevent Mr. Imran Khan from being electorally valid or being able to participate. Because if you look at the genesis of what happened when Imran Khan was removed as Prime Minister in the no confidence motion of last year, April 2022, it was again his reading that these three actors ganged up: PMLN, PPP, and the army, and that's how he was ousted from power. So he has been demonstrating his street power, which is quite, I would say, visible and fairly deep, and insisting on elections, where he has got the judicial endorsement that the Election Commission, as it happens, we are speaking on May 13th, and the election was supposed to be tomorrow, May 14th, in Punjab, the province of Punjab. But obviously, it's not going to happen, because in another unprecedented move, the government of the day has actually defied or not accepted this kind of order passed by the Supreme Court to the Election Commission. So the strength that Mr. Imran Khan has is if their election is held in Punjab, it's quite likely that he will have a very resounding victory. And if there is a national election also, which was supposed to be for October, that he would win hands down. But this, I think, is the dichotomy that ostensibly, if elections are supposed to be one of the benchmarks of democracy, and Imran Khan, quote unquote, and the PTI win the election in a democratic manner, that may not be the best thing for Pakistan.
Indeed.
Because in the last few years, if you look at Mr. Imran Khan's policies, they have been very detrimental to the development or even to deal with the challenges of Pakistan. And this was manifest in the period 2018 to 2022, when Mr. Imran Khan was the Prime Minister. Because if you look at him, he has, again, charismatic as a cricketer, playboy, turned politician. Then he went off into a detour into religion. And he seems to have this messianic kind of obsession on various issues. And more recently, in the last couple of years, he's taken a very, very virulent anti-Western, anti-American kind of stance. And along with it, he's leavened it with a kind of populist, Islamist kind of orientation, trying to suggest that going back to the basics of the Islamic faith would be in the interest of Pakistan. And this takes him closer to the Taliban in many ways.
Right.
And that, I think, is the disturbing kind of development that can fructify if he comes to power. As it is, as I said, one of the Taliban TTP affiliates is extending support to Mr. Imran Khan in his current struggle. So therefore, I think there is a kind of consensus, not only among the political parties of Pakistan and the army, but what I would call as the more discerning Pakistani demography, the citizens of Pakistan, who are aware of what is ahead. I mean, look at the current situation. I was just seeing social media. I'm told in the last few hours, the dollar has become more than 300 Pakistani rupees.
I
mean,
was
that is
coming to
extraordinary.
that. Yeah, this is unbelievable. I mean,
So these are the kind of issues that Mr. Khan is not willing to acknowledge as very serious issues.
yeah,
And what kind of policies will you put in place? He doesn't have bench strength. He doesn't have a team that has the experience of dealing with politics. South Asian politics, frankly, politics anywhere, whether it
yeah.
is the United States or in South Asia or elsewhere. I mean, there is what I would call as a certain manner in which politics are conducted. It can't be this escalation and take the country to the brink and then say that, too bad, you guys didn't listen to me, kind of,
Yeah.
this obduracy is not something that would be of use to Pakistan at this point in time.
Someone, I forget whom, someone described Tehreek-e-Insaf as essentially Imran Khan's fan club, and not necessarily a significant
Yeah,
political
absolutely.
party.
I think, he has rallied. I mean, he has definitely, I think, projected himself to his support base, which is also drawn, I think, from his cricketing profile.
Right.
That, whether it is Imran Khan with the ball or Imran Khan as a captain, swashbuckling,
Yeah.
that he can help Pakistan out of any crisis. That has been magnified many times. And also because he comes as the man who will clean up the stables in Pakistan, meaning that there is an enormous amount of resentment about the dynasty, the two dynasties in
Right.
Pakistan. One is the current Prime Minister, Mr. Shahbaz Sharif, whose elder brother, Nawaz Sharif, had held power for many years, many decades. And we have the Zardaris, which is related to Benazir Bhutto, going back to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto.
Indeed.
So
Yeah.
these two are the principal kind of dynasty, I would say, branches. And Imran Khan, when he entered the political arena, came as the so-called clean outsider. And that was the appeal that he brought to one part of the support base within Pakistan, by the way, which is intensely loyal to him. On Tuesday, when he was arrested, social media was awash with young people who were, upset. Some were angry, some were crying, and some were saying that Pakistan doesn't deserve a man like Imran Khan who is willing to put his life on the block, etc., etc. So
Right.
there's a whole narrative, which is not very different, by the way, if I could take the liberty of saying this on your show, what Mr. Donald Trump had managed in the US.
Absolutely. I
For
was
his
about to
support
say
base.
that.
He I'm told that some people in his extremely loyal support base or the demography there believe that he's actually the return of Jesus. And sometimes they say that when he stands in sort of audiences and puts his hands up, etc. My reason for drawing attention to this is that if you look at the Urdu kind of social media and commentary that occasionally comes, and I'm told in the NWFP, the erstwhile NWFP, the Northwestern Frontier Province Pakhtunkhwa, as it's called now,
Right.
there apparently he is really seen as someone who's God's man,
Yeah.
Khuda ka banda.
Right.
He will, help Pakistan to come out of its myriad problems, and that is the kind of, I would say, irrational, messianic message that he seems to love nurturing
Yeah.
and projecting
He's,
without
he's,
any plan. So that's the danger.
he's doing nothing to disabuse them of that notion. But
Yeah.
the broader point, Uday, that I wanted to ask you about is Pakistan is in the midst of a ruinous economy, one of the manifestations of which is, like you pointed out and we read, that the rupee is 300 rupees to the dollar now, which is astonishing as in terms of the devaluation of your local currency. Where do you think it's headed? What happened to the current administration that they decided that it's all right in the middle of all this massively debilitated economy, to create an equally dangerous existential political crisis by arresting the way they did Imran Khan?
Well, I think this is where I think some very, very objective and ruthless kind of decision making has to follow very soon, because all the indicators are that Pakistan is down to literally 4 weeks in terms of its own foreign exchange reserves, and that they desperately need a bailout, whether from the IMF or some benefactor. Now, the deep pockets that Pakistan has traditionally turned to have indicated that they want Pakistan to clean up its mess, and only then would they be able to even discuss any bailout package. So we're only looking at the IMF, meaning that the earlier benefactors, whether it was the United States or China or Saudi Arabia, which may have the deep pockets, are not willing at this point in time to provide any emergency fiscal assistance. The IMF, in turn, is not going to provide any assistance if, for instance, there is martial law and that the army takes over. They will want a political, economic, fiscal, all kinds of, I would say, conditions have to be met. So I think somebody within Pakistan has to really be aware. It's not that they're unaware. There's some very fine minds over there in Pakistan. The professionals, whether it is the bureaucrats, the economists, or the diplomats who are aware of what is at stake. And I think they are trying to signal, but obviously in vain. But the political parties and the army, I think once they stabilize the internal or the domestic violence, which has followed in the wake of Imran Khan's arrest, would have to convey a kind of reassurance to the global community, particularly the IMF, that for a variety of reasons, both economic, fiscal, common man, prices, politics, and we are not even talking about the nuclear issue. That anxiety is always there at the back of the mind. I'm not suggesting that the Imran Khan arrest directly leads into any dilution of Pakistan's command and control on the nuclear weapons, but all the signs are not encouraging.
Right.
If the army is going to be preoccupied and the Taliban is reaching out and trying to support Mr. Imran Khan and parts of the army, we have had instances where very senior army officers, even during the time of General Musharraf, had exhibited leanings which were more sympathetic to the Taliban and the Islamist kind of cause. I'm saying these are all signs that don't really give any kind of encouragement to an external interlocutor. So therefore, I think it's very imperative that literally within the next week, 10 days, there should be some return to firm hand on the tiller, if I could use a sailor's phrase, to say that we are aware of what is ahead of us and the reason for Pakistan to close ranks. And if need be, have a national government. I mean, I have been sort of advocating this kind of approach to deal with the situation, saying that let politics really, I think, prevail. And if there is no consensus, let the three principal parties, the PPP, the PMLN, and even the PTI, without Mr. Imran Khan, if they want representation, form a national government, and the army can provide the necessary, I would say, assurances that elections will be held, say, within the next 8 months, 10 months, even if the October deadline cannot be met, because Pakistan is coming out of floods, climate change, all kinds of calamities have struck that country. So to stabilize things, bring the dollar back to a reasonable rate, which is what the Pakistani currency has been, and let people have the benefit of being able to buy their daily requirements, whether it is dal, chawal, or the kind of daily requirements, so that their ability to have a modicum of human security is in place. And then tell the rest of the international community that we'll do the following things and we'll have the next election, whether it's in Jan or Feb or whatever, and let the best party with the best policies, prevail. That, as I said, is a wish list, which is very, I would say, like a holy grail. We're not sure that it'll happen in a hurry, but that's the only path I see ahead.
Right. A couple of points about the army. Do you think they would choose to see this as a serious wake-up call? Look at it, the storming of the GHQ, the attack on ISI properties, and burning of the Corps commander's residence in Lahore. Now, these are three seemingly unconnected, but they are still very much connected manifestations of the disquiet or the disenchantment which seems to have gripped at least a section of the Pakistani people. Do you think the army has within its calibration to see this as a serious wake-up call?
Mayank, when I look back, you'll forgive me if I tend to be a bit cynical about this. My reading of Pakistani history is that if you look back at the last 50 odd years, 1971, the birth of Bangladesh and the manner in which the Pakistani army in particular had conducted itself should have been the most, I would say, serious wake-up call for any institution. Because again, this is a very tragic chapter for South Asia, but the Pakistani army, an institution that by the constitution was mandated to protect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Pakistan and the life of every citizen. It was the same institution, the same army that engaged in genocide. And I use the word in a very, very, I would say, careful and informed manner when they turned against the East Pakistani citizen, mainly because he or she was of Bangla ethnicity.
Right.
We're talking about 1970s, a very tragic chapter of South Asia. After it happened, internally, everybody thought that the Pakistani army would go through an institutional kind of mea culpa and come back to some kind of professionalism. But they just swept everything under the carpet
Yeah.
because of, as I said, the same kind of logic that accepting our guilt or the inadequacies or transgressions would dilute the primacy. So they, in a way, papered over 1971, the enormity of 1971, and then engaged in the next 2 decades, where again institutionally they made a Faustian bargain, which is in the Zia years when General Ziaul Haq was the martial law and then the president, where they consciously embarked upon the Islamic, I would say, jihad route. You see the beginning of the jihadi fervor on the Zia decade, where you have this famous kind of image that even President Ronald Reagan was applauding at one time, the brave Mujahideen, with the Quran in one hand and the Kalashnikov in the other. And this was in a way encouraged by General Zia's own, I would say, personal orientation towards religion. But institutionally, this is my point, that for any institution to support terrorism in this way, which is what it became later, after the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan, Pakistan was supporting terror groups ostensibly to get strategic depth in Afghanistan against India. This was state policy.
Right.
So which means that, again, I mean, I'm going back to theory and saying that Max Weber used to say that one of the central tenets is that for any state, there has to be a monopoly about the use of force, which should vest in the military, but that should be under a legitimate kind of constitutional framework. The use of force has to be mandated by law through the constitution. Otherwise, you become either a mercenary or you become criminal and you end up in using force in ways that are deemed as illegal. That's what has happened to the Pakistani army. And they have refused to go through what I would call as the internal soul searching to say that what we are doing is not correct, not institutionally valid. And they are paying a very heavy price, because today the irony of Imran Khan and the TTP is the same Pakistan military, going back to the Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif years, which nurtured the Taliban, looking for strategic depth in Afghanistan. Today, it is the Taliban and its affiliates that have strategic depth in Pakistan, all the way up to Karachi.
Yes.
So today, if an affiliate of the TTP is applauding Imran Khan and are encouraging that the Sharia must be imposed, this is a fringe, but it is happening.
Yeah.
I think this will tell you why I'm a little skeptical that, when General Musharraf was there, if you remember, when 9/11 happened, he gave that famous speech saying that we have to, be more rational, we cannot be so, etc., etc. Literally a few days after 9/11, then that was a purely tactical kind of step back. And then he was actually back in bed with the Taliban. And then the same General Musharraf had to deal with the ignominy of Lal Masjid.
Yeah.
Despite Lal Masjid, the army refused to do its institutional, kind of cleanup. What they did was to ease Musharraf out, and they brought Kayani in.
Right.
And then we had Peshawar. If you remember the army school in Peshawar, I wrote about this at that time, and I said that this must be a wake-up call for the Pakistani army not to engage and play footsie with the Taliban, because as in Pakistani, in the social media in Urdu, it was said that the coffins of the young children are the heaviest to bear.
Yeah.
For any parent or for any society. The Pakistani military went through this tragedy, this grief. But when they came out, they were still willing to engage with the Taliban. So, which is why after the American withdrawal in 21, when the Taliban takes power in Kabul, it is the Pakistani foreign minister, the retired the DG ISI, who is the first person to go there and greet the Taliban. So what I'm trying to say is that the kind of institutional mea culpa is perhaps something that the army may not be willing to do in a sincere manner. And anything that would affect the primacy, as I said, within Pakistan or affect the army's image and position, they would shy away from. And for that, Kashmir comes back into focus. Kashmir is unfinished. Right. India is the enemy. Therefore, the Pakistani army should be given necessary space and funding so that we can prevent India from taking over Pakistan. Now, this is the narrative that is kept alive. Now, General Bajwa recently tried to apparently make some kind of a reference to this, if you remember the leaked tapes. And the establishment, the deep state, went into overdrive to penalize General Bajwa when he said that we may not even have enough fuel to enter into any kind of serious operation against India. So these realities are not being acknowledged. So unless that particular, what I would call as, truth is accepted, once I had said, and Pakistani academics and military people in a track 2 conference got very upset when I said that Pakistan has to go through a lobotomy, starting from school children all the way up to GHQ Rawalpindi. Because if you're teaching your school children that the Hindu is the kafir and has horns on his head and must be killed, must be whatever, because that's part of jihad, and that is happening. And everyone knows that you should not be poisoning the minds of children in this manner, but it is being endorsed. Then that society, the ecosystem, the socio-cultural, the socio-political, the religious kind of ecosystem is all being poisoned. So that's what I mean by the lobotomy part. And I don't think the Pakistani army in particular is willing to do this, because they themselves have been Islamized. I met young officers from Pakistan army in the US particularly, when they are there on study leave and so on, where they genuinely believe that they are the defenders of the faith.
Yeah.
Today, there are sections in the Pakistani army that believe that they are not just defending the sovereignty of Pakistan. And then, of course, they go into layers and layers where the United States is seen as the enemy, and, they are doing this and they are doing that, which is really the post 9/11 kind of backlash. So these are all, I would say, very sort of imagined kind of scenarios where the institution is seen as the defender of the faith. And therefore, it justifies the investment in terrorism. And hence, Mumbai 2008 can be justified. So this is the kind of warped logic which I believe is, in a way, preventing the Pakistani army from the mea culpa that is so necessary.
Just last couple of things. One is, of course, speculate either scenario, whether Imran Khan is found innocent and acquitted of all charges in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. What happens then? And conversely, if he's held guilty and essentially banned from public life or even politics for the rest of his life, what do you think happens in either case? And the second is, of course, how should India treat the crisis in Pakistan?
I think I'll try and respond to the last part of your question about India. What is it that India can do or ought to be doing at this point in time? I think the wait and watch, is the only option that India has at this point, which I think would be the most prudent. Because India trying to make any comment, however helpful, including saying that we will send food aid because situation in Pakistan is very dire, we can send medicines, whatever. Mind you, the politics in India may not permit it. You just have to recall what happened in Goa at the meeting of the foreign ministers of the SCO.
Yes.
And the kind of, I would say, exchanges that took place between the Pakistani foreign minister, Mr. Bilawal Zardari, and Dr. Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister, it had become very bitter and acrimonious. So therefore, the mood in India just now is not particularly, shall we say, conciliatory towards Pakistan. But I think the standard response default is, when there is turbulence of this type in Pakistan, the possibility that some of the non-state elements, the militant groups, the terrorists, whoever they are, under whichever banner, including the Taliban, the TTP, and their affiliates with the Lashkar or whatever, that they could use this as an opportunity to carry out some kind of an attack. After all, we had the most recent one in Jammu, where we lost personnel of the special forces. So that, I think, is the first, I would say, default response to ensure that the security alert is of a higher order. But within Pakistan and its own political developments, at this point, I only see China as the country that could perhaps read the Riot Act, which I'm told they have done quietly. So we gather. No one is going to confirm this, because they have a lot of stakes in Pakistan for the long term in relation to the BRI, the CPEC, and various other projects. But the two scenarios that you mentioned, one, that Mr. Imran Khan is exonerated of all charges, and he is allowed to be back in the political arena. Then the chances that he would win because of the sympathy factor and all the current developments, I think, is very high. In which case, as I said, while democracy may have prevailed in terms of the electoral process, personally, I don't think it would be the best thing for Pakistan, mainly because of, I think, his proven inability to deal with the challenges as we saw in the last 4 years, and that he would again play up to the gallery in terms of the populist, nationalist, Islamist kind of, I would say, messaging that he is normally indulging in. The second scenario, I think, is also not particularly encouraging, which is that if he is charged, and between the army and the PPP and the PMLN and the judiciary, if it comes on board, particularly the Chief Justice of Pakistan, who has shown a certain empathy for Mr. Imran Khan personally, but if he's also brought on board and they succeed in removing Mr. Imran Khan from the electoral fray, then the way in which the PTI responds, what you cited earlier, Corps Commander's house being attacked, GHQ being ransacked, police stations being set on fire, if this multiplies and becomes uncontrollable, then we are back literally to square one in terms of civil war conditions. And again, the army might be called in just to stabilize, literally on the day-to-day kind of security for the common citizen, which doesn't augur well, because the so-called 4 weeks of foreign exchange might come down to 4 days. And for any country, particularly a country of Pakistan's size, which is almost 25 crores, 250 million people, if not more, would be an exceedingly challenging task for anyone to bring this back, because once any state goes down a certain path, to use the metaphor of the oceans, if you have a huge super tanker of 200,000 tons or whatever, even changing course, in a very planned manner is very time intensive. Like that, a nation state which goes down a certain path for the last 60, 70 years, starting from the kind of discourse that we saw post 71, and where Pakistan has gone in terms of its own narrative, I think bringing that back is going to be uphill. But at the end of the day, it has to begin.
Yeah.
It will be good if it begins now, but then, as I said, for an Indian analyst to say this may not be particularly welcome in Pakistan, but somebody there has to pick up the gauntlet and, I would say, decide that this bitter pill has to be swallowed.
Yeah. On that note, Uday, always a pleasure. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you, Mayank. As always, I keep saying that yours is one show where you allow me to ramble.
And no, this is not rambling. This is this is cogency out of control.
Because whenever I talk to you so much of history, the hard disk starts booting. And then I say, oh my God, it's all there. So